Welcome, everyone, as we learn the venerable learning of Chok Yisrael for Parshas Zos Habrocha, Yom Beis, Day 2 Be'ezus Hashem, sponsored by Mifal Chok HaIlami, and also by Berich Goldwasser, that he and his family should have everything wonderful, and Refuah Shalema for my Shver, Avigdor Aryeh ben Rivka. He should have a Refuah Shalema b'Sei Sherchei Yisrael. And we're holding now B'Zos Yehuda. After Moshe Rabbeinu addressed Ruvain, it skips to Yehuda, and Rashi will address why this is. Vayomer, and he said, Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda. Listen to Hashem, to the supplication of Yehuda throughout the ages, the prayers of David and Shlomo and Asa and Yehoshaphat and Chizkiah. Yodav Rov Loi, his hands should be able to fight for him. The Gemara we just learned in Masechtas Avodah Zarah says that when it says hands fighting, it means archery, because archery you need to use both hands. The Ezer Mitzarav Tiyah, and you should be a helper against his enemies. Rashi says this refers specifically when Yehoshaphat had a knife through his throat, and Hashem helped rescue Yehoshaphat. Says the Targum, Yehuda v'amar kabal adinoi tzlasei Yehuda b'mipkei la'gocha krava ul'amei tosevnei l'shlam Yidoi Yabdun La Puranasa Bisanoi Visoid Mibale Devavoi Havale. Says Rashi. These Rashis are tricky. B'Zos Yehuda. So Rashi says, well, why does it go from Ruvain to Yehuda? What about Shimon and Levi? Samach Yehuda l'Ruvain, it puts Yehuda next to Ruvain. Mipnei sheshneim hoidu kilkil shebiyadam. Both of them confessed the sins that were in their hands. We know that Yehuda confessed about what he did with Tamar, and Reuven confessed about moving Yaakov's bed from the tent of Bilhah to the tent of Leah. Shenemar, and it quotes a pasuk which, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know what the pasuk was talking about, but it's a pasuk in Eiv. Asher Chachamim Yagidu, the wise people related this, and they didn't deny their guilt, and therefore Lahem Levadam, to them alone was the land given. V'loi Ovar Zor B'Seichem, and no stranger passed between them. And the V'loi Ovar Zor B'Seichem, Rashi says, means that nothing came in between the bracha of Ruvain and the bracha of Yehuda. V'oid Pirsh Rabbi Seinu, our rabbis also explained that Shekol Arba'im Shana Shel Yisrael B'Midbar, when Klal Yisrael was traveling in the Midbar and they had the Aron of the Shvatim, the coffins of the Shvatim, Hayu Atzmais Yehuda Miskalgulin Ba'aron. The bones of Yehuda were disjointed and they were rolling around in his aron. Why? Because he accepted an excommunication that if he wouldn't bring back Binyamin to Yaakov, I'll be guilty to my father all the days. Now, even though he did end up reuniting Yaakov with Binyamin, but we have that a nidui, afilu al tanai hiba, even if the stipulation is fulfilled, it still occurs. Amar Moshe, so Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for Yehuda and said, look at his merit, mi garim l'Ruvain sheyayda, who caused Ruvain to admit? Yehuda. And therefore Yehuda should get credit, and therefore v'chula, the Gemara says, that his bones went back into the socket, and therefore that's another reason why Reuven and Yehuda are placed in proximity. Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda, listen to Hashem, to the voice of Yehuda when it is needed. Tefillah David or Shlomo, the prayers of David and Shlomo in their campaigns. Va'asam ibnei Akushim, and Also, when he fought the Kushim, v'yoshafet mipnei ha'amonim, yoshafet when he fought the Ammonites, v'chizkiah mipnei Sancherib, and Chizkiah when Sancherib came against him and he didn't even have an army. V'al amoy tivi'enu, and you should bring his nation back, l'shalom, peacefully, min ha'mechama, from battle. Yodav ravlai, his hand should contend for him. Yarivu rivai, they should be able to do Hashem's battle. V'yinkam nikmasai, and avenge his vengeance. Ve'ezer mitzarav tiyeh, and you should be a helper from his enemy. This refers specifically al Yoshafat Ispal. He prayed for Yoshafat al Melchamas Ramais Gilad when he was doing battle with Ramais Gilmad, and already the executioner had a knife by Yoshafat's neck. Vayizak Yeshua, Yeshua cried out, Vashem Ozrei, and Hashem helped him. Davar Achar, when it says Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda, listen Hashem to the voice of Yehuda, the truth of the matter is it skips Shimon. Because after Yehuda it goes to Levi. What happened to Shimon? So Shema is a hint, it's the first three letters of Shimon. So Kan Ramaz Bracha LeShimon. Here it hints that there is a blessing to Shimon, Mitoich Berchaisim Shel Yisrael, and it will come from the blessing of Mitoich Berchaisim Shel Yehuda. It will come from the blessings of Yehuda. V'afke Shecholko Eitzol. Indeed, when Yeshua divided the land, Natal Shimon Mitoich Gerala Shel Yehuda. Shimon's chelik was absorbed inside the chelik of Yehuda, like it says, Shenema Mechevel B'nei Yehuda, from the boundary of Yehuda will be Nachmanis B'nei Shimon, will be the inheritance of Shimon. Now, why doesn't it say Shimon? Why doesn't it say Shimon by itself? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was disturbed over what happened. The Nasi of Shimon sinned, as we learned in this week's parasha, with Zimri ben Saul, with Cosby Basur, with the Midianite princess, Almasha also Beshitim, Ken Kosev Bagodas Tilim. Levi Amar, and to Levi Hashem said, Tumecha v'urecha my urim v'tumim, which is in the folds of the choshen worn by the Kohen Gadol. Leish chasidecha is going to be worn by my pious man, and that's of course Aaron. Tumecha v'urecha klape shchino medaber. Shchina is saying this. Asher nisisay b'masa. You know what? I have to say the pasuk first. Levi Amar Tumecha v'urecha, the urim v'tumim is leish chasidecha, is to your pious one. Asher nisisay b'masa, who you tested at Masa, and he didn't complain as the others complained. To Riveyu al Mei Mariva, you challenged him by the Mei Mariva, and unlike the others, they met the challenge, and by the Mei Mariva, Aaron was faithful. Says the Rav, the Targum, Dal Avu, excuse me, Levi Aimer Tumaya Varaya Albeshta Ligvar Dishtaka Chasida Kodamach Di Nasi Sohi bin Nista Vavashlim Bechantoi Almei Matsusa Vishtachach Behemen. Says Rashi, Tumecha Vurecha Klape Shchino Medaber, excuse Levi Amar. To Levi, he said, that means Va'al Levi Amar, concerning Levi, it was said, Tumecha Vurecha Klape Shchino Medaber. He's speaking about Hashem, that your Urim V'tumim will be worn by Ish Chasidecha, by Aaron. Asher Nisisai b'Masa, you tested him at Masa. Shaloi Nislainanu im Sha'am Alinim. He didn't shave it. Levi didn't complain with the other complainers. To Riveyu v'Gomer Ketargumai, like the Targum says, that you challenged him by the Mei Mereva, and he came out successful from the test. Davar achar teriveu al mei meriva. Teriveu means you provoked Aaron at the mei meriva. Nis takapta loy lavoi ba'alila. You provoked him by coming at him with a charge that he didn't do. After all, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Shimu na ha'morim, listen, you rebels. Aaron and Miriam didn't say it. And Moshe Amar, Shimu na ha'morim, Aaron and Miriam me'asu. But they were punished because of their high level, so they bore responsibility. Now we know that for the Cheta Egel, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Mila Hashem Eloi, who is with Hashem, gather around me to punish the sinners of the Egel. And people killed, it says, their fathers, their mothers, their brothers, their children. They didn't show preference to a father or a mother. They didn't recognize a brother if he was deserving of death. They made it as if they didn't know their son. For they listened to your command, and they kept your covenant. Mindina ba'ape achowi uvenoi loy nesiv are netoru matras memrach ukiyamach loy ashniu. Now Rashi is troubled over here. It can't be literally their father. It can't be literally their son or their brother, because it says no Levi sinned in the golden calf. Their father, their son, their brother would have been a Levi. So Rashi explains, when Klal Yisrael did the sin of the golden calf, Amarti, and I, Moshe Rabbeinu, said, Mila Hashem Eloi, who is ready to fight for Hashem, join me. And that's why, like Kol B'nai Levi, the entire B'nai Levi joined me, but Tzivisim, and I commanded them, Laroi, Gesavi V'imai, even Laroi, to kill. It must be Avi Imai, their maternal grandfather. When it says Aviv, it doesn't mean literally Aviv, because their Aviv would be a Levi. But it means their mother's father. The mother was from a different Shevet, so their maternal grandfather was from a different Shevet. Oy es Achiv me Imai, or a maternal brother. A brother from a mother, not from the father. Again from a different Shevet, or Ben Bitai, or the son of a daughter who was from a different Shevet. Because the Efshel Farish Aviv Mamish, also, it can't be they killed their father, the Chaim Bon of Mamish, or the Echav Me Aviv, or a paternal brother, because any of those, the father, the son, or the paternal brother, would be Leviim, Shai Leviim. And they weren't guilty of the Egel, because like B'Shevet Levi like Chata Echad Mehem, none of them sinned, because it says Shnema Kol B'nai Levi, Ki Shamru Im Rasecha, for they listened to your command, which is Lo Yalacha Elohim Acherim, not to worship other gods, Uvrischa Yinsayru, and they kept the bris milah. This is something else. All of Klal Yisrael in the desert didn't circumcise their children because of the danger of circumcising while traveling. But Shevet Levi did. Uvrischa Yinsayru, Oisam Shenoldu Bamidbar, Yisrael Lo Hayumalin Es B'neim. Klal Yisrael did not circumcise their children because they were afraid. But Beheino Yamalin Es B'neim, they did circumcise their children, so that's the meaning as Brischa Yinsayru. Yoru Mishpatecha Yaakov, Levi will teach the laws to Yaakov, V'sayrascha Yisrael, and your Torah to Yisrael. Shevet Levi was subsidized with Meiser, and the Kahanim with Truma and Meiser, Trumas Meiser, and therefore they were available, they didn't work, and they were available to teach Torah to Klal Yisrael. And Yosimu Ketayra Ba'pecha, they will offer the Ketayras to your presence, V'chalil, and burnt offerings, that's a carbon oila, al mizbechecha, on your altar, says Rash, first let's see the Targum, Koshin Ilain Dialfen Dinach Liakov or Raisach Yisrael, Yeshavan Ketores Busmin Kadamach, or Gemir Rava al Midbachach. Says Rashi, Yoram Mishpatecha, Ru'yan El Lakach, they are fitting to teach the Torah. The Chalal means a carbon that's entirely smoked up, which is an oila, which is a burnt offering. Now we continue with the Navi, where Shlomo HaMelech said that, may the words that I pray at the time that we're mechanech the Beis HaMikdash should remain by you always, that we should always be successful against our enemies. L'man das kol ha'amei haaretz, that all of the nations of the land should know ki Hashem hu Elokim, that Hashem is God, ein oid, there's nothing else that exists. V'haya levavchem shalom im Hashem Elokeinu, may your hearts be perfect with Hashem, our God, l'leches b'chukav, to walk in His statutes, v'lishma mitzvaysav, to keep His loisases, kayom hazeh, like on this day. V'amelech v'chol Yisrael amay imay, here they offered a magnificent amount of karbonos. 22,000 cattle we'll see. They offer sacrifices to Hashem. He offered peace offerings to Hashem at the time of the inauguration. 22,000 cattle, and sheep 120,000. As Beis Hashem. And they inaugurated the temple, HaMelech v'chol b'nei Yisrael, the king and all of b'nei Yisrael. Now, this capital in Tehillim is talking at a time where the Milchamas Gog Magog is finished, and there will be no more wars, and Hashem says, Harpu, Goyim, you should relent from fighting, U'du'u ki anoichi elikim, and I am Hashem, Orim Bagayim, exalted over the nations, Orim Ba'aretz, exalted over the land. Hashem Tzvaka is Imait, Hashem the Lord of hosts is with us. Miskav Lanu, He's a stronghold for us. Elikei Yaakov Sela. Now, Lam Natseach, David HaMelech prepared this song for the musician in the Beis HaMikdash, which was originated by the Bnei Korach Mizmar. By the Bnei Korach, when the Bnei Korach were Loi Meisu, so they said a song that refers to the time after Gog and Magog, and they said, Kol ha'amim tiku chaf. Now either this means literally all nations should clap their hands, or it means that all nations should join their hands in dance. Hariol elikim, shout to Hashem, and jubilation that there's peace in the land, Bikel Rino, with a voice of song. And now we learn from Moyed Cotton, Misha Hafach Ezesav. Let's say somebody already turned over his olives. Now, once the olives are turned over, if you leave them too long and you don't put them in the press, they ruin. So Misha Hafach Ezesav, now he had time to take care of it before Chalamayid. However, Ve'eru Evel, but he lost a relative and he had to sit Shiva. Or some other accident happened, he got sick, or he was tricked by workers who said they were going to come and they didn't come, and now it's Chalamayid, and if he doesn't take care of his olives, they're going to spoil. So Tayin Kaira Rishayna Umanicha La'achar Hamayid. He could put a beam on it, the first beam, to start the pressing, and that will at least keep it that it shouldn't spoil, and he should leave it there until after Yom Tov is finished. Div Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yaisi says since he could start the process, Zayleif, he could pour the olives into the press, V'gaimer, and finish the pressing, put it into casks, V'gaf Kedarkai, and seal them in their normal way. We also have a machlokes by wine. V'chein misha yeyenoi b'say chabar, if he had wine in the vat. Now, if the wine is in the vat, you already have to finish the process. But the Eru Evel, he became an oven, he had to sit Shiva, or he got sick, or or workers misled him, and now it's Chalamayid. So the Tanakh says, Rabbi Yossi says, Zayleif, he could pour them into the press, v'gaimer, and he could finish the he could pour them into the casks and the gaimer and finish the process, the guf kedarka, and seal it in the normal way. Div Rabbi Yaisi. Rabbi Yehuda says all he could do is cover the vat with pieces of wood, so it shouldn't become vinegar. Rabbi Yehuda isolate limudim, he covers it with planks, bishvil shelo yachmatz, that it shouldn't become vinegar. Now, if you have fruit in the field, machnis adam peirosav mipnei agafon ganavim, if fruit, let's say, fell off the tree, so you could bring them in on Cholamayid, so it shouldn't be stolen. V'shayla pishtana min hamishra, and you could take the flax out of the pool where you're steeping it in, v'shvil shaloi save in order it shouldn't get ruined. U'v'vat shelo yechaven es malachta b'mayid, as long as you didn't leave the work to be done for Cholamayid. But if you're mechaven malachta Cholamayid, v'chulam im kivna malachtan b'mayid, if the inspectors of Bezdin realize that he left it deliberately to do it on Cholamayid, Yaivedu, the Chacham declare it hefker, and he loses it all. Ein like kimbatim avadim avahema, you can only buy houses and servants and animals, el l'tzarech hamayid, only if you need it for the festival, or l'tzarech hamaycha shein lo ma'yachal, or you're buying it from a seller who doesn't have what to eat. Ein mefanim abayis l'bayis, you can't schlep things from one house to another house far away, because that's a tirchi yisayra on Cholamayid. Aval mefanu l'chatzar, you could move it from one house to another house in the same courtyard. Ein mevim kelim and beis umim, you can't bring home something from a craftsman that's not needed for Yom Tov. However, v'im chayshish lehem, if the craftsman needs to be paid, and you're afraid to leave it there after you pay him because he might ask you to pay him a second time, or if you're afraid to leave it there because you're afraid that he won't take care of it and it will get stolen, then you could take it, but you can't take it home. You move it to a safe place in another courtyard. If you have figs left out to dry and it starts pouring, you could cover it with straw. You could pile figs on top of figs on top of figs in order that the upper one should cover the lower ones. If you are a merchant of fruit, clothing, or utensils, you could sell them privately if somebody needs a pot for the Yom Tov, or if somebody needs a suit for Yom Tov. Hunters who have animals to sell, cereal makers who make wheat into cereal, and grit makers that make beans into grits, they could sell and ply their merchandise privately for the needs of the Yom Tov. They were machmer not to do any trade on Cholamayid, but the halacha is not like Rabbi Yaisi. Now the Gemara Moed Katan tells us, Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, Nafak b'chumrasa de medusha. He went out on Shabbos, just into the courtyard, not outside, with a signet ring, where the base of the ring was made out of metal, and the signet was made out of coral. And he drank water that was heated up by a guy. Shama Reb Ami ve'ikbad. Reb Ami heard that he did these two practices, and he was makbid. He didn't like it. I'm Reb Yosef. So Reb Yosef says, I don't understand. My time ikbid. Why should he be makbid? Because he went out with a ring, with a coral signet, but the halacha is you're allowed to go out with jewelry in a courtyard. Hatanya, Hashirin, chains, Hanazamim, nose rings, vatabois, and finger rings, harihen kekol hakelim, they're like any other utensil, anitalim b'chotzer, that could be moved in the chotzer. And imishim de ishtei mayim de achim kapel arma, and if it's because he had water that was heated up by a goyish cook, but anything that could be eaten raw, there's no bishalakim. Anything that could be eaten raw, there's no problem of bishalakim. So if a guy cooks up a carrot, since you could eat the carrot raw, there's no problem of a guy cooking up a carrot. Says Gemara, you're right. But Adam Choshev Shani, since you could lead to permit it further, an Adam Choshev should be more careful. Amar Rav Chananel Amar Rav, Kaitzitz Adam Dekel B'Mayid, you could cut down a date palm on the Mayid, even if you only need the twigs for fuel. So you could do the whole job of cutting down the date palm, even though you need the twigs. Layat alo Abaye cursed such a leniency. Rav Ashi Avale Abba B'Shlanya, he had a forest in Shlanya. He went to cut down some trees for its twigs. Amalei Rav Shila Mishlanya Rav Ashi. So Rav Shila Mishlanya said to Rav Ashi, "My daitech, the Kamar Rav Chananel Rav. You're relying on what Rav Chananel said in the name of Rav that you could cut down a date palm, afal pishen et tzarchel and the tzarchel, even though you need the twigs. But Halayin Allah Abaya cursed that behavior. Amalei, so he says Lo Shmieli. I didn't hear it, meaning Kalayim Lo Svirli. I don't hold of Abaya. I don't hold of that Allah. However, Ishtamet Narga, as he was going to cut it down, the axe slipped from his hand and almost cut his foot. He wanted to cut the shank of his foot. He did a U-turn and he didn't go because he felt that was a sign that he shouldn't be go against the opinion of Abaya. Rabbi Yeshua permitted three things. Rabbi Yehuda permitted three things. I made a bracha. Ready? Rabbi Yeshua Shara L'Me'akar Kisna. Rabbi Yehuda permitted uprooting flax, or L'Mikdal Keshusa, to cut down hops, or L'Me'akar Shimshimi, and to pull out sesame on Chalamayid. Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef. I understand the first two. Bishloime Kisna, to cut the flax, Chazi L'Chafifi. You could use the flax to cover Paris. Keshusa, the hops, is Chazi L'Shikra, to make beer. Elashimshimi sesame L'mai Chazi. What's it fit for in its raw state? Says the Gemara, Chazi L'Naziyah the Isbo, their seeds are edible. Rabbi Yanai Avalei Ahu Pardisa the Mataz Zimna B'Chulu D'Mayid. Rabbi Yanai had an orchard whose fruits ripened on Chalamayid. And since it happened to ripen on Chalamayid, if you don't cut them down, they could become overripe and it's not good. So Katfe, he cut them down. L'shana, the next year, since the people saw that Rabbi Yanai cut his vineyard on Chalamayid, Shaye Kuli Alma L'Pardesaya L'Chulei L'Ma'ada. They waited for Chalamayid to harvest their vines. Now that's not allowed because that's Mechav Malachta B'Mayid. However, Rabbi Yanai saw that inadvertently he caused people to sin. The next year, Afke Rabbi Yanai L'Pardesei Hoshata, the next year he renounced any benefit from his vineyard the next year in order to penalize himself from causing people to sin. Now, the Zohar tells us, if you remember, we said that when Aaron passed away, the Anani HaKavod departed from Klal Yisrael. When the Anani, you remember that the Anani HaKavod was a cloaking mechanism that kept us concealed as we traveled through the Midbar. But once Aaron died, so the cloaking mechanism left, and the Canaanites saw us, and they immediately attacked. Tachazi, come and see. Kol inun shnin dekam Aaron. All the years that Aaron was alive, Yisrael b'tzeila de Klal Yisrael was under the shadow of faith, which is of course the Anoni HaKoyvet, Tchois Ilain Anonim, under the 7 Anonim. However, Basa Demis Aaron, after Aaron died, Istalak Anon Echad, the main Anon, which was the Anon of Chesed, since Aaron was the Mid of Chesed, of Frois Aleinu Sukkah Shleimecha, Dehu Yamina Dekula, which is the right of all the spheres, the Kadai Istalak, and once that cloud left, Istokul Kol Shari Imei, the other 6 clouds left with it. And therefore, V'Hischaziu Kulu B'Griusa, we were exposed in our full weakness. This is already explained. Vayiru Kol Ha'eda, and the entire congregation saw Kigava Aaron. Now, besides the literal meaning that everybody saw that Aaron passed away, Al Tikre Vayiru Ela Vayiro, we were seen, we were exposed. Because the Anon left, so we were exposed. Miyad, immediately, Vayishma Kanani Melech Arad, the Kanani, the king of Arad, heard, Yoshev HaNegev, Kivo Yisrael Derech HaAsarim, Klal Yisrael was traveling by the way of Asarim. Shama the Istalaku Inuna Anonim, that the protective cloaking mechanism of the clouds were removed, or Miss Tyra Ravrava, and there died our great director. The Chol Inun Anonim is Kasherbei, where all 7 clouds were tied to him. Now we will see that later they came back from Moshe Rabbeinu because of Moshe Rabbeinu, but not in time. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, HaKanani Melech Arad, Yoshev HaNegev. Kanani, the king of Arad, who dwelt in the south. Now, it's a little bit difficult because the Meraglim said that they saw that the Amaleki was in the south. And here it says the Canaanites dwelled in the south. So Rabbi Yitzchak says that actually the Canaani were those that dwelled in the south, Vadai. However, V'kad also inon ma'alin the Shada Moshe, when the spies that Moshe Rabbeinu sent came, Amru Amalek Yoshe Beretz HaNegev, that Amalek lived in the south. Now they said that because they wanted to scare Klal Yisrael, because Amalek had already successfully attacked us. Begin l'taver libayo, to break our spirits. Da Amalek itper cheleyan kadmisa, because Amalek already attacked us successfully first. Amar Rabbi Abba, Vayishma HaKnani, the Canaanites heard, Makom Mayri Hacha. What is it speaking about? Basar dis talaku inan anonin. What's it coming to teach us over here after these clouds departed? Ela Canaan ksiv bey, it says about Canaan, Vayomer orur Canaan eved avodim le'echav. Cursed is Canaan, they will be a servant to servants, to your brothers. So it teaches us that when somebody goes out from under the tzela de memnusa, he's ready to be delivered to a servant, not just a servant, a servant. Hacha olifna ma'an de'apik garmei mitzila de memnusa, one who was taken out from under the shadow of faith, which means the anonim, is chaze, is fit l'meheve eved la'abdei avdin, to be a servant for the servants of servants. Hador d'chsiv ha'yilachem Yisrael, Kanani attacked Yisrael when they were exposed. Vayish mimenu shavi, and they took from them captives. Who natal avdin mi Yisrael legarmei, he took avodim from Yisrael for himself, so it became an eved to an eved's eved. And therefore, Valdoksiv Kola Ezrach be Yisrael Yeshe B'Sukkos. Any citizen of Yisrael should dwell in the Sukkos. Kol man dihi mishorsha v'giza kadisha di Yisrael, whoever is from the root and branch, the holy branch of Klal Yisrael, should on Sukkos yeshvu b'Sukkos. The Sukkos, remember, is a symbolism of the Ananei HaKavod, which is a symbolism of the Tzela de Memnusa, the shadow of faith. So, Chais Tzela de Memnusa on Sukkot, you should sit below the shadow of faith. Whoever is not from the branch and root of the Holy Yisrael, Lo Yisabahu, he will not sit underneath. Taking himself out from under the shadow of faith. Ksiv, Canaan biyodai moiznei mirma, Canaan in his hand, scales of deceit. This pasuk in Isaiah is referring to a specific Canaanite, Eliezer Eved Avram. Eliezer Eved Avram. The Tachazi, Ksiv, it says Orur Canaan. However, since Eliezer joined and lived in the house of Avram under the Tzela Nusa, under the shadow of faith, Avram was the big Maimin in Hashem, or begin the Zacha Canaan Dol L'Shamosh Avram, because this Canaanite Eliezer merited to attend Avram, came in the Shimish Avram, Yisiv Tchais Tzila D'Mem Nusa. He sat under the shadow of faith together with Avram. And therefore, Zacha L'Meipik Ma'u Lotya Dislatya, he freed himself from being cursed, and instead he became blessed. And that's what Lavan told him. Lavan said to him, Bo Baruch Hashem, come in, you are blessed by Hashem. My Kamari, the command, the Yosef Tchaisilim Lemnusa, since Eliezer sat under the shadow of faith with Avram Avinu, Achsin Cheirei, he inherited freedom, Level of Noila Omen, for him and his children forever. Visbarach Birchas Eloi was given a celestial blessing. However, Manda Apik Game Mitzilu de Memnus, one who removes himself from the sukkah, from the shadow of faith, Achsin Galuse Leil of Noi, brings exile to him and his children. Nechsiv V'Yilachim Yisrael, we know that when we were not under the Anani covered, Canaan attacked us, Vayish Bimenu Shevi, and took from us captive. Now, in the following Musar, the Rabbeinu Yoina, remember who is a Rishon, quotes the famous Gemara in Arachin. It's also a Yerushalmi in the beginning of Peah, that says that the three worst sins is idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed, and Lashon Hara is Keneged Kulam. And Rabbeinu Yoina asked the question that must bother a lot of people. How could it be these three sins are Yeharig Val Yavar, you have to die rather than doing them? That's not true by Lashon Hara. And it says if you Avodah Zarah, it's like you deny the whole Torah. That's not true by Lashon Hara. So how could Lashon Hara be worse than the big three? So Rabbeinu Yoina is going to give us a very practical answer to this question. Amru Rabbi Seinu, Shaka Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is equal, connected Shalosh Averis, to the three great sins: Ve'elu Hein, Avodah Zarah, idolatry, V'gilei Arayos, immorality, U'shvichas Damim, and murder. B'Avodah Zarah Nemar Chata Amazeh Chata Gedola. The nation did a big sin. V'gilei Arayos Nemar Ve'eich Esa Hara Gedola Azayis. Yosef said, how could I do this terrible, great evil? And b'shvichas damim nemar gadol avonim in the sight. Cain said, my sin is too much to bear. So by all of them it says gadol in the singular. But v'ilu al lashon hara, Amar, about lashon hara, about sinful gossip, it says Yachris Hashem kol sifsei chalokas. Hashem should cut down all smooth tongues. Lashon medabras gedolos, tongues that speak gedolos in the plural. So we see that Lashon Hara is worse than the big three. However, says Rabbeinu Yoina, we have to give an explanation. How could it be? How could Lashon Hara be worse than these three things? Rather die and not transgress it. It doesn't say that about Lashon Hara. whoever worships idolatry, kikayfer b'kala Torah kula. It's as if he denied the whole Torah. It doesn't say that about lashon hara. V'amar ki amuma l'avodah zara is a muma l'kala Torah kula. A muma to idolatry is a muma to the whole Torah. It doesn't say that about lashon hara. So, but kasher tosim libchol l'ma'amorim zichron l'vracha. When you listen to this dictum of our rabbis of blessed memory, timsel l'cha kama sheroshim v'kama pon. There's many roots and many angles. Kibala lashon, the key is that the one who wags a slanderous tongue, who shoyne bivaltai, he repeats his sin. Eser ponim yachlim b'yayim. 10 times a day, he embarrasses people. V'yavish, he speaks, makes them smell bad. V'yachber, he slanders. V'dabes vasyeser, he speaks extra words. V'yakab b'seiser, and smites people in secret. Umiyitin kates lansha, and therefore there's no end to his punishment. Kibala lashon lo yasim kinsei lamilan, because the slander of the tongue, he doesn't set a limit to his words. B'shigam avera kala, even though it's much less than idolatry and murder and adultery, but kvei de ma'id, it's very serious. Ali shanai seivelas pamim rabbis, because he's a multiple sinner. Kasherik damnu, like we explained before. Afki chator gedola v'ra'achayla, even though it's a great sin and it's a terrible sickness. Ukamran zichron l'vracha shakal lashon hara keneged shalosh averos. When they said that lashon hara is equal to the 3 sins, im ratzaynam leimer keneged over ayson la'eshi yitviku yitzray. It means that it's equal to somebody that does it once when his yetzer overpowers him. Like keneged amumar v'ayotzim l'klal, not a repeat offender and an exception, lava aleim b'chaleis, who does adultery every day or murder every day. And of course, that murder every day is much worse than lashon hara. But it's telling us that lashon hara is worse than the big 3, because the big 3 is only done maybe once when he's overpowered by his yetzer hara. But lashon hara is done all the time, and the fact that it's done all the time makes it worse than these 3 that are only done maybe once in a blue moon. The Rambam tells us, the waiter that serves the guests, he can't partake in the food. It's not his. V'derech rachmanasu, but it's a merciful. It's merciful for the guest to give a taste to the waiter of every course, because his mouth is watering in order to settle his mind. If while he is serving him, they offer him a cup of wine, and he makes a bracha, each cup that they give him, he has to make another bracha. It's not up to him. He doesn't know if he's going to get another cup. It's up to the guests. Now, if one of the guests goes outside to urinate, so when he urinates, he uses one hand in order to clean away some of if there's some drips. Noitel yodayachas, he washes one hand, v'nichnas, and he re-enters. Diber, if he leaves, and diber and chaverai, and he goes out to speak with his friend, v'hiflig, and he stays out for a while until he was masiach das for the suda. Then noitel shtei yodav, he washes both hands, v'nichnas, and he goes back. If, however, he leaves towards the end of the meal, when all they're doing now is having an after-dinner drink, he comes back, he goes to his place, and he washes his hand there. And then he turns back to the table. Now, he washes his hands there in order that people shouldn't suspect that he didn't wash his hands because they were only drinking. but since they might eat together with the drinking, he has to wash his hands, and he washes it in front of them. Lest people say, Lo natal yadav, he didn't wash his hands, because they probably won't eat again. But since they could eat after the drinking, so he does have to wash his hands, but since they might think he didn't wash his hands, so therefore he should wash his hands when he comes back. We'll stop over here. As I said, we did it in 45 minutes. I had a feeling, because the Mishnayos was smaller, that we would finish earlier. And now we're going to learn the Mishnah Yomis.